3 days before my 63rd birthday, my sister-in-law handed me a bill for $11,400 and told me I should be grateful for the privilege of paying it. She was smiling when she said it. That's the part I still can't shake. Not the number, not the humiliation, the smile. Let me take you back to where this really started, because if I just tell you about that Saturday afternoon at the Henderson's lake house, you'll think I'm leaving something out. You'll think, surely a man doesn't end up holding an $11,400 invoice at his own retirement celebration without some warning signs along the way. And you'd be right. There were signs. And I just spent 40 years being too decent to read them clearly. My name is Robert. I'm 62 years old, 63 in 3 days as of that Saturday. I spent my career as a civil engineer, 39 years designing bridges and drainage systems for a county infrastructure department in North Carolina. Not glamorous work. Steady, necessary, honest work. I raised 2 kids. I paid off a house. I buried a wife, my Margaret, 6 years ago, and I kept going because that's what you do. My son, Daniel, is 34. He married a woman named Cynthia 8 years ago, and Cynthia has a sister named Patrice. This story is about Patrice. I want to be fair to Cynthia because she's not a villain here. She's something worse in a way. She's a woman who saw exactly what was happening and found somewhere else to look. But I'll get to that. Patrice is 51 years old and has never, in the 8 years I've known her, held a job for longer than 14 months. She moves between cities, between situations, between men who are willing to absorb her expenses until they aren't anymore. She has a gift I've rarely seen, the gift of making her own comfort sound like someone else's obligation. She frames every request as a natural consequence of your relationship to her. She doesn't ask for things. She simply explains why you owe them to her. When Daniel and Cynthia first got together, I welcomed Patrice the way you welcome any family that comes attached to someone you love. I invited her to Thanksgiving. I included her in Christmas. When she was between apartments one spring, I let her stay in my guest room for 6 weeks. 6 weeks became 4 months. I didn't say anything, because Daniel and Cynthia seemed grateful, and keeping the peace felt like the right thing for a father to do. That was my first mistake. Not the generosity, the silence. Over the years, small things accumulated. Patrice would join family dinners and order the most expensive thing on the menu, then reach for her purse with that particular slowness that meant she expected someone else to intervene. Someone always did, usually me. She borrowed money twice, once $800 for a car repair, once $1,200 for what she described as a gap before her next paycheck. Neither amount came back. When I mentioned it gently to Daniel, he looked uncomfortable and said Patrice was going through a hard time. I let it go. I always let it go. I want you to understand something, friends. I'm not a man who holds grudges. I'm not a man who keeps score in relationships. I was raised to believe that generosity is its own reward and that you don't help people with a stopwatch running. I believed that, and I still do. But there is a difference between generosity and being systematically used by someone who has identified you as the path of least resistance. I didn't understand that difference clearly until the retirement party. The retirement party was Daniel and Cynthia's idea. I hadn't asked for one. I'm not a fuss-over-me kind of person, but Daniel called me in February and said he wanted to do something special for my birthday and retirement combined, and I was touched. I told him to keep it simple. He said, of course. He said, don't worry about a thing. I should have worried. The venue was a lake house property belonging to a friend of Cynthia's family. I was told it was being loaned to us as a gift, and that turned out to be partially true in the most painful possible way. And the house was loaned. Everything else, the catering, the event staff, the floral arrangements, the bar service, the custom-printed banners with my name and years of service on them, everything else was contracted and billed. I didn't know any of this when I arrived that Saturday afternoon. I walked in and it was genuinely beautiful. Round tables with white linens. A catered spread from a restaurant I'd always liked but considered too expensive for regular visits. An open bar. About 40 people, colleagues. Old friends. Some of Daniel's friends. Cynthia's family, including, of course, Patrice. There were balloons. There was a banner. There was a slideshow running on a screen in the corner with photographs of my career, my kids, my Margaret. I cried a little at the slideshow, not embarrassingly, just quietly, the way a man cries when he sees his life compressed into 90 seconds of photographs and realizes it was a good one. For the first 2 hours, it was one of the best evenings I'd had since Margaret passed. Then came the toast. Patrice stood up. I noticed she'd had several glasses of wine, by that point not sloppy but loose. She had the room's attention the way she always manages to have the room's attention, through a combination of volume and confidence that most people mistake for authority. "I want to say something about Robert," she said, "because I think it needs to be said. This man has been the backbone of this family. Every gathering, every crisis, every gap that needed filling, Robert was there. He's always been there. And what do we do for the people who are always there? We celebrate them, and we make sure they know the love they've given out is going to come right back around." People applauded. I smiled. It sounded like a toast. It sounded like a tribute. Then she reached into the bag hanging on the back of her chair and took out a manila envelope. "So, in the spirit of coming full circle," she said, still smiling, still with that wine warmth in her voice, "I think it's only right that the guest of honor be the one to close out the celebration properly." She walked to my table and set the envelope down in front of me. "The venue coordinator needs a check before the end of the evening," she said, quietly enough that not everyone heard, loudly enough that the people at the nearest 4 tables did. "Everything's itemized inside. We kept it as reasonable as we could." I looked at her. I looked at the envelope. I looked at Daniel, who was studying his napkin with the concentration of a man defusing a bomb. I looked at Cynthia, who was looking at the centerpiece. And I picked up the envelope. I opened it. $11,437. Friends, I want you to know what that moment felt like. Not the anger came later. In that moment, the primary feeling was something closer to vertigo. Like the floor had shifted slightly. Like the room I was standing in had quietly become a different room without anyone telling me. I had walked in thinking this was a gift. I was sitting inside something that was, apparently, my own bill. I looked up at Patrice. She was back at her seat, talking to someone, laughing about something. She had delivered the envelope and moved on the way you move on from a task you've completed. Like handing someone a parking ticket. Like leaving a memo on a desk. I looked at Daniel again. This time he met my eyes. And what I saw in his face was not surprise. It was not outrage on my behalf. It was apology, the small, preemptive apology of someone who knew this was coming and chose not to warn you. He knew. That landed harder than the invoice. I put the envelope in the inside pocket of my jacket. I straightened my tie. I picked up my glass, and I finished what was in it. Then I stood up, and I walked outside to the dock, and I stood there for a few minutes looking at the water, because I am 62 years old, and I have learned that the space between receiving terrible news and responding to it is the most important space in any situation. Use it wrong and you make a scene. Use it right and you make a decision. I used it right. I came back inside. I found the venue coordinator, a pleasant woman named Sandra who clearly had no idea she'd been placed in the middle of a family ambush. I told her I needed to step outside to make a call regarding payment. She thanked me for letting her know and said there was no rush until 8 o'clock. I went to my car. I called my accountant, who is also one of my oldest friends, a man named Gerald who has handled my finances for 22 years and answers his phone on weekends because he knows I wouldn't call on a weekend unless something was real. I told Gerald what had happened. There was a pause. "Do you want to pay it?" he asked. "I want to know what my options are," I said. We talked for 11 minutes. When I went back inside, I had a plan. I sat back down at my table. I ate the rest of my dinner. I spoke to my former colleagues. I thanked people for coming. I looked at the slideshow one more time, when it cycled back around. And I did not look at Patrice, and I did not look at Daniel. And when people asked me if I was enjoying myself, I told them honestly that it had been a memorable evening. At 7:45, I found Sandra again and I paid her. I paid her in full. Every dollar. I didn't make a scene. I didn't hand the invoice back. I didn't announce anything to the room. I simply settled the bill quietly, thanked her for a beautifully run event, and asked her for a receipt in my name. Patrice watched me do this from across the room. I saw her notice. I saw something shift in her expression, not gratitude, not guilt, satisfaction. Calm. Like she'd placed a bet and watched it pay out. I let her have that moment. I needed her to have it. On the drive home, I called Gerald back. We talked for 40 minutes. By the time I pulled into my driveway, 3 things were in motion that Patrice did not know about and would not know about until it was too late to reverse any of them. The first thing, for the past 6 years, since Margaret passed, I had been quietly named as a beneficiary and informal financial trustee on a family property account that Cynthia's mother, a woman named Ruth, who I genuinely love and who was at the party and watched the whole thing happen and squeezed my hand on the way out and said, "I'm so sorry," Robert had established for her daughters. Ruth had set it up during a period when her health was uncertain and she wanted to make sure the property didn't get tangled up in estate complications. She'd asked me to be involved because, as she put it, she trusted me more than she trusted the situation to sort itself out. I had been quietly managing that account, making sure taxes were paid, keeping it orderly, never mentioning it and never using it for anything other than its intended purpose. I called Ruth on Sunday morning. I told her what had happened. There was a long silence on her end. "I wondered," she said. "I wondered when Cynthia told me about the party. I think you should know," I said, "that I intend to remove myself from that account. I'll help you find someone appropriate to replace me and I'll make sure everything is in order before I step away. But I think you deserve to know why I'm doing it and I think you should have a conversation with your daughters about what happened last night." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You've been more decent to this family than we deserved, Robert." I told her I didn't believe that. I told her I believed in the family. I just didn't believe in being handed invoices at my own party. The second thing, I had, over the years, co-signed on a storage unit lease that Patrice used for what she described as business inventory. It was $63 a month, and I'd co-signed as a favor when she couldn't qualify on her own credit and Cynthia had asked me quietly, as a one-time thing, 2 years ago. I called the storage facility and began the process of removing my name from that agreement. Straightforward. Clean. The third thing was the one that would take longest but mattered most. Daniel and I needed to talk. Not a blow-up. Not an accusation. A real conversation, the kind that takes longer than either person wants it to and doesn't end cleanly. I scheduled it in my mind for the following Saturday. I would give myself a week to be calm enough to be fair. Now, I told you I would tell you what happened in the days after. So let me tell you. Monday morning, Patrice called me. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was breezy and brief. She hoped I'd enjoyed the party. She said it had come together beautifully. She said she'd been thinking about a small beach trip in the fall and wanted to see if I might want to help coordinate something for the family. No mention of the envelope. No mention of $11,400. Nothing. I sat with that voicemail for a long time. This is what I want you to understand, friends. The envelope wasn't the real offense. I'm 62 years old and I have money and the bill, while significant, didn't ruin me. The real offense was the assumption. The assumption that I would absorb it without comment. The way I had always absorbed things without comment. The assumption that my silence over the years had been consent. That my generosity was a renewable resource they could draw from indefinitely because I had never once drawn a line. Patrice didn't hand me that envelope because she was cruel. She handed it to me because she had correctly identified that I had spent 8 years training her to believe I would accept it. That's the part I had to own. Tuesday, Cynthia called. This conversation was harder. Cynthia wasn't breezy. Cynthia was crying before she got 2 sentences out, which is a disarming thing in a person you've loved as a daughter-in-law for 8 years. She said she hadn't known the full amount until the week before the party. She said Patrice had told her it was mostly covered and that the remainder would be minimal. She said she'd been afraid to tell me. She said she was sorry. And I believed her about the fear. I wasn't sure I believed her about not knowing. "Cynthia," I said, "I'm not angry with you, but I need you to understand something." When that envelope landed on the table in front of me, I looked at Daniel. And he knew, which means you knew. And you both made the decision not to warn me. That's what I need you to sit with. And she cried more. I let her. I didn't fill the silence with reassurance. which is my instinct, and, which I've learned, is not always the right thing. Sometimes people need to sit in what they've done without being immediately forgiven out of it. Wednesday, Daniel texted me, not called, texted. The message said, "Dad, I know we need to talk. I'm sorry. I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't want to ruin the party." I read that text 4 times. I didn't respond until Thursday morning. I said, "Saturday, come for breakfast." He came Saturday. He sat across from me at the same kitchen table where I'd helped him with homework in middle school, where he told me he was going to propose to Cynthia, where we'd sat together the morning after Margaret's funeral and I'd made eggs because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. He looked terrible. He hadn't been sleeping. "Tell me what happened," I said. "From the beginning. Don't manage it. Just tell me." He told me. Patrice had approached Cynthia 4 months before the party with the idea. It had started as a simpler planned dinner at a restaurant, maybe 20 people. Patrice had offered to coordinate everything, which she framed as her gift to me. Cynthia had been touched. Over the following months, the plan expanded. The lake house, the caterer, the bar service. Each addition was presented as an upgrade, as making it more special. By the time Cynthia began to understand the scale of what was being planned, the deposits had already been made. In Patrice's name but cross-referenced against family. Patrice had, at some point, told Cynthia, "Robert will want to contribute. He's that kind of man. We just shouldn't bring it up beforehand because he'll try to scale it down and then he won't enjoy himself." That's the sentence that tells you everything you need to know about Patrice. She had reverse-engineered my character into a financial instrument. My tendency not to make a fuss. My desire for other people to enjoy themselves. My discomfort with being a burden. She had assessed all of those qualities accurately and built a plan around them. "She told you I would want to contribute," I said. "Yes," Daniel said. "And you believed that." He looked at the table. "I wanted to," he said quietly. That's the most honest thing he's said to me in years. He wanted to believe it because believing it meant he didn't have to confront his wife's sister. It meant the party could go forward and everyone could be happy and the ugly parts could be attributed to my gratitude rather than his silence. I poured him more coffee. I told him that I loved him. I told him that we were going to be fine, he and I, but that some things needed to change. I told him that I was removing myself from anything financial that involved Patrice, that I would no longer co-sign, vouch for, or otherwise absorb costs connected to her, and that I needed him to understand why and to not put me in those positions going forward. He nodded. He said he understood. He looked relieved. Honestly, the way people look when someone else finally names the thing they've been too afraid to name themselves. Before he left, he said, "What are you going to do about Patrice?" "Nothing," I said. He looked surprised. "She showed me something I needed to see," I said. "I'm going to use that information going forward. That's all." End quote. End quote. He thought about that. Then he said, "She's going to think she got away with it." "Let her think that," I said. "I paid for a very expensive education. I intend to use what I learned." I haven't spoken to Patrice since that Saturday at the lake house. She's called twice more. Both times I let it go to voicemail. Both messages were increasingly puzzled in tone. The second one mentioned the beach trip again. Mentioned that she'd found a great deal on a rental. Asked if I might want to look at the numbers with her. I haven't called back. 2 weeks after the party, Ruth finalized a change to the family property account. Not only did she accept my resignation as trustee, she restructured the account so that Patrice is no longer a joint beneficiary in the automatic sense. Ruth did that on her own. I didn't ask her to. She told me about it over the phone in the same quiet, tired voice she'd used when she said I'd been more decent than the family deserved. I told her she didn't have to do that. She said, "I know. That's why I did." There's a version of this story where I make a speech at the party, where I hand the envelope back, where I say something cutting and perfectly timed that shuts Patrice down in front of 40 people and gives everyone something to talk about on the drive home. I've thought about that version. Part of me likes that version. But I'm 62 years old, and I've learned something about dignity that took me too long to learn. Dignity isn't about the moment. It's not about the room or the audience or the perfect comeback. Dignity is what you do after you've had time to think. It's the calls you make on Sunday morning. It's the conversation on Saturday over eggs. It's the quiet, permanent repositioning of your trust and your resources away from people who have demonstrated they'll misuse them. I paid $11,437 for clarity. Most people pay more for less. My 63rd birthday, 3 days after the party, was quiet. Daniel and Cynthia came over. Just the three of us. Cynthia brought a cake she'd made herself lemon, which was Margaret's recipe, which Cynthia knows by heart because I gave it to her when she married Daniel. We sat on the back porch and ate cake and didn't talk about the party. At one point, Cynthia said, "I'm going to do better, Robert." I said, "I know you are," and I meant it. I don't know what happens next with Patrice. I genuinely don't. She'll land somewhere she always does. There will be another situation, another gap, another person who seems like the path of least resistance. I hope it goes differently for her someday. I hope she figures out that the smile after handing someone an envelope isn't actually winning anything. But that's not my work to do. My work is here, at this kitchen table with the people who showed up on my birthday and brought the right cake. That's enough. At 63, I can tell you with complete certainty, that is more than enough.